Hi, this is Dr. Bob Zyback with Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, Inc. This lab is being prepared for Southwest Oregon Community College students for the last 4 years. We have worked with Tasha Livingstone's forest recreation class, spring term F251. Because of the coronavirus condition, we are now doing distance learning. Person that I've been working with on this project from the beginning has been McKenzie Peters with Northwest Maps Company. She is doing the video work, including editing on this lab. The background of this project begins in 2017 when Jerry Phillips, David Gould, and Wayne Giese and I took a tour of the Elliott and discussed what we could do to better its management and use by students. I was put in charge of education. Jerry has written a history on the Elliott, and the subsequent oral history tours and field trips by students and lectures have been based almost entirely on his book, which was published in 1996. Wayne Giese and I founded Oregon Websites and Watersheds project together in December of 1996 and have worked steadily on it ever since, including the last 4 years with Southwestern Oregon Community College, or SWOCC. Wayne died, unfortunately, in late 2019. We'd worked together for 30 years. He was 99 years old and working hard right up until the end. David Gould's family settled in the what became the Elliott State Forest in the 1880s. The whole family was raised here, including his grandfather Clarence. David and Jerry are the two foremost experts on Elliott State Forest history. This next slide is McKenzie Peters. She has also worked with Jerry, David, and previously with Wayne and I on this project from the beginning, transcribing oral histories, taking recordings, photography, and now since coronavirus, she's been our videographer, doing all of the video work, photography work, and final edits. The first class we worked with at SWOCC was Tasha Livingstone's 2018 Forest Recreation class. And we combined to not only develop the 6 field trips that are the basis of our current field trips, but also produce the very first recreation plan for the Elliott State Forest. The 2019 students built from the work of the 2018 students. They refined the recreation plans. They developed 5 field trips from the 6 original field trips and posted their work online, which we will be working with later. Finally, the poor 2020 students, this is what a field trip looked like with them, me talking in front of a wall, which was unfortunate. We've gotten better with these products since then, and McKenzie will be coming in shortly to describe what equipment we used and how we derived these products and what improvements we've made since 2018. Before introducing McKenzie, we're going to take a quick tour of the Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project website on the Elliott State Forest. If you notice, I'm on Zoom right now. That puts me at the Cougar Pass lookout tower in the background. That's one of the features of our field trips. We're on a short road from Loon Lake to Cougar Pass, and we have proposals for that you'll be looking at. This first video is going to focus on the history of the Elliott and up through 1996, Jerry's book. Then Jerry, David, and I will be talking about what we think has transpired in the previous few years and what our thoughts are concerning the future of the Elliott. As you're viewing this, there's 2 types of history. One type of history is the history of people in the land, And that goes back thousands of years on the Elliott Forest. The other type is what's written and recorded. So you're looking at history now. You'll be making history as you write reports and that. Jerry and David are the two foremost historians of the Elliott State Forest ever. And we're very fortunate to have them as consultants and describers of past conditions. Okay, here's a quick overview on how to navigate Oregon Websites and Watershed's homepage. If you want to find out the history of Oregon websites, you go to the About button, and that will tell you all about the projects we've been doing over the last 24 years. The Elliott State Educational Forest Project is what we started with Wayne and David and Jerry, and then working with McKenzie Peters and with Tasha Livingstone's class. And this lab will be on history. So if we go down to the history section, we can get oral histories, we can get David's family history, we can get Jerry's book. Today's presentation will be based entirely on his book. If we go to David's page, they've got family diaries, they've got photographs, they've got the Goulds of Elkhorn, which tell about the family's history on the Elkhorn Ranch. If we go to Jerry's book, today's presentation will be based entirely on Jerry's history. He managed the Elliott, probably the most successful forest manager up until his retirement in 1989, and wrote the history of the Elliott in 1996, and he will be telling that history shortly. Okay. On the same page, we can get maps. There are hundreds of maps and thousands of photos and dozens of videos about the Elliott on the site. This is just a starter set. There's maps in several other locations, including the student plans, references, and you'll be able to have not been updated for a couple years, but we've got dozens of references. They're all in PDF files. They can all be downloaded. They're organized by history, news, legal requirements, and all of these hyperlinks on the right-hand column all go to PDF files. So you can find any of the information you need, maps, recordings, oral histories, anything that might interest you about the Elliott. Now, next week we will, or in 2 weeks, we will be going to forest recreation reports written by students in 2018 and 2019, and we will be visiting, we'll be taking 5 field trips and be visiting these as well. So that should be enough to get started. The main thing we'll be dealing with this lab is Jerry's book, but these other materials are there and available for additional research. Here we are back at Cougar Pass, thanks to the wonder of Zoom. I'm with McKenzie Peters, videographer for Northwest Maps Company. She's going to describe the equipment we've been using, and then I'm going to turn the program over to her to show you how to navigate our YouTube channel and also to describe upcoming field trips. McKenzie, can you briefly describe the equipment we were using for the field trips last year and the equipment we're now using for this year's labs?
I used a Samsung S9 to record the video for the 2020 field trip videos, and I edited them with Sony Vegas Platinum Movie Studio 16. For these videos this year, I have upgraded to an iPhone 11 and Adobe Premiere Pro.
Okay, with that, I will leave you to take over the program and to describe the videos you've been putting together and upcoming field trips.
We'll be going on some pretty cool field trips and seeing some really cool stuff. Here's the bus that you won't be taking this year on Jerry's View. We'll be seeing some old growth led by David on the Jerry's Reserve, Loon Lake, Golden and Silver Falls, and Indian Springs. The first field trip will be next week, so I will show you how to navigate ORWW Media Channel to find field trip number 1. Here we are at the home page. You'll scroll down to the ORWW YouTube channel. And you'll scroll down through the playlists to find 2020 Elliott Forest virtual field trips. And click on the first one, field trip number 1.
This is Dr. Bob Zymek again. We're ready to go on our first virtual.
Down under the Show More tab, you'll see the ORWW link. You'll click on that, and it has all the background information and pictures for the different stops on the field trips. A lot of useful information there. You'll also see that this has been indexed so that you can skip parts that are uninteresting and skip to parts that have more interest. Like maybe you're more interested in Larson Redwoods. It's a pretty little spot there. Or maybe you want to hear about Trout Creek. Really useful, that little index there. If you navigate back to the ORWW playlists and find back to the Elliott Forest virtual field trips, you will also be able to find the workshops. Here's workshop number 1. Was used for 2020 class, but has some useful sections. It is also indexed to help you locate areas of interest, like Elliott Forest Oral History Index.
Here's the link to the Forest Recreation. We also had another one link before.
It also has a 14-minute instructional video showing how to use drones to monitor and document road and trail conditions.
This is all shot with a iPhone and a drone, free of editing, video editing software.
The next lab is in 3 weeks and covers the 2018 SWOCC Student Draft Forest Recreation Plan, the first ever written for the Elliott State Forest. It will also include this 14-minute drone instructional video, and David Gould will show us how to perform practical road and trail maintenance. The main part of this lab is Jerry's Oregon Department of Forestry presentation from his book. There's 30 slides and it's about an hour long. Now here's Jerry.
Now this program, you said this is your favorite view of Jerry Phillips Reserve. This program is put together for Department of Forestry leadership issues and early management challenges. So
yes.
As we get started here, what was the focus of this program you're going to give here, and who was it for?
Well, the overall plan, the overall program was to discuss and establish a history of the Elliott State Forest, what its purpose was, and what the history of ownership has been, and our effort over the many years to fulfill that mission. And this is just one view of the older timber on that forest.
Okay, so here's the cover of your book. Would you like to say a few words on that?
Well, yes, when I retired, I thought I ought to, while my memory is still fairly good, to sit down and write a history of the Elliott State Forest and my memories of being involved all those years. I began working on that forest in 1956, and I worked on it for 37 years. And was involved in all the early work and the development of that forest for all those years. And that's a picture of the forest, of the first major logging operation that we had on the forest. First large timber sale was held in 1958.
We'll have this picture coming up later, and we can talk about that a little bit more there. So here's Francis Elliott.
Yes. Well, in about 1912, Governor Oswald West and Francis Elliott were friends. Elliott was the very first state forester in Oregon, and Governor West was our very forward-looking governor. And the two men decided that Oregon ought to have a state forest. The national forests were brand new, established about 1906, so they were new, and these two men believed that we ought to have a state forest in Oregon along the same lines as the national forests were, and they could do it through trading state timberland for that purpose. And the book tells the story of how that happened, and the forest was finally established in 1930, and Francis Elliott, the state forester, died that same year, and so it was named for him.
And that's our first state forest.
For first state forester.
Okay, here is this map's from your book.
Yes. The plan was to trade the state timberland, state school lands that were inside the National Forest of Oregon for one block of national forest land. And what was chosen finally was a block of national forest land in the Siuslaw National Forest, which was the south end of the Siuslaw Forest. And that map, the heavy line around it, shows the original national forest boundary. That was the boundary, was the Siuslaw National Forest boundary. So the Elliott Forest lands were within that boundary. There's also some private land in there, but the land that became the Elliott Forest is all within that boundary. So what's discussed at this point, and the map illustrates, is the fact that there were a number of major fires that burned between 1840 and 1890. A number of fires, And all I can vouch for is that during our inventory of the forest, there was an inventory, and we used increment borers as we worked, and we bored trees that we came to every day, some trees every day, to determine their ages. And what we found is that in most places on the forest, the birth dates of the trees were between 1875 and 1895. All different ages in that span. Now you can see on the map here that there's some areas that are marked in green. Those areas were that's timber that was.
And this is the boundary.
That was old timber.
Elliott right there.
That were not in those fires for various reasons. That timber, those areas did not burn in that time period from 1840 until 1895. The areas that are colored in red are ones that did burn during that time period. Now, within that area, there are islands of different ages. So you can be any one place in that area, in the red shade area. You can be any place in those. You can find older or younger trees because there are many different fires. And we all know that on the Tillamook area of Oregon, there were fires that burned and reburned and reburned and reburned. And the same thing happened on much of the Elliott Forest. There were many fires, and Dave Gould here, his family has a family history. Even one of them was even a government land surveyor on that area during that time. And there's written records showing different fires, different fire histories. It's a great variation there in fire history.
We'll be going over this map later, and David, we discovered the 1879 big burn that your family moved into, and so
That's one of them.
Elkhorn Ranch. We think it's 1889 or so.
That sounds right.
Winter snow. The foreground's the valley there, and there's an Indian family living there when the Goulds first arrived, I think.
Well, they were coming there back and forth.
Well, they're traveling through there,
Yeah.
but the whole valley floor was wide open, where they got the orchard in there, and now we can see those snags in the past. And David, before you said that the older snags had burnt, so they'd been through an earlier fire, and then we got younger trees. The older trees are in groves. We talked about the family hauling some of those trees down for the sawmill and to build with and firewood, maybe through there. But we see a pattern of, I think, 2 burns, and it looks like the foreground didn't have very many trees or much clearing at all to do. The benches had stands of older, larger diameter trees, and up to the ridge line on the hillside there is smaller diameter. So how would you explain that?
It's a series of fires. A series of fires.
Yeah.
No one will ever know how many fires
Yeah.
or when they were.
Yeah.
The ground, all the foreground wasn't bare like that. It was brush and hardwoods, probably brush and hardwoods.
How'd the Goulds get rid of it then to plant with orchard?
The hard way. They cleared it with horses or mules, whatever it was. They cleared that ground. It wasn't bare like that. You know, where we live, 60 inches of rain or more,
Yeah.
something's gonna grow.
Yeah.
That ground was not bare like that, of course.
How about if it'd been burnt regularly?
And there'd be debris, and snags.
No, I mean burnt regularly where the snags were all burnt. I mean burnt regularly for hundreds of years.
It grows up.
So you even if,
Nature abhors a vacuum, Bob.
aha,
Nature abhors a vacuum.
yeah. Well, my point is, and we've always butted heads on this point, but my contention's always been that the Valley Forest, people were in there gathering firewood, setting fires all the time, all the years, fishing, picking berries,
In places.
yeah, and so my thought is that the West Fork there is one of those places, one of those main travel routes, and one of those main places where people would be coming and going and
There were
fishing and hunting.
There were camping places, there camping
Yeah.
places. But it wouldn't be extensive, wouldn't be like 4 or 5 or 6 acres of ground all at once. I don't think.
Uh-huh. Here's the fire one. We talked about this before. Jerry, you said the fire started up in Scottsburg.
That's what that story went.
And
I
David
just
said
repeat
it started over at Loon Lake.
I'm just repeating stories I've heard. So.
Uh-huh.
And what I learned when I came to work here from old timers, what they said.
Uh-huh.
Do it. Okay, started on Scottsburg, people clearing land there.
Yeah.
Of course, then we knew they did that, trying to burn that ground off. And fire was a good thing. See, people didn't think that fire was a bad thing. They thought fire was a good thing.
Yep. Yep.
And then the east wind, the northeast wind picked it up and carried it clear here. Yeah.
And we got the 1879 records with Larson's barn burning up, so we know where the extent was.
And there were a bunch of fires. Dave and I would have to agree with that. There's a number of fires.
Yeah.
It wasn't all one or two or even three probably.
Yeah.
In Tillamook, there was 5.
Yeah.
And then here, there could have 5 here.
Well, and then Burnt Ridge, you both said that people burnt that real regular.
Until 1945, they did.
Uh-huh.
They just told us that.
So I think the bottom line is that perimeter of burnt ground and the unburnt ground are not burnt since the 1700s anyhow.
Right?
That's pretty accurate. The whether it's 1840 or 1868 or
That's
1879.
what we observed from working all along in through there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's not right along our boundaries.
So the boundary is good. The exact years we'll never know, but we know some of the major years. We know 79. We know 68. We probably 1840, and then we're guesstimating based on Weyerhaeuser's study in 1845.
Well, then
Or 1945.
we bored hundreds of trees out there.
Yeah.
So the birth rate being somewhere between 1875
Yeah.
and 1890.
We'll be looking at okay. So this map here.
Yes, that map is one of the different colors there. Again, it illustrates ownership history. The light green represents original Elliott Forest timberland. Was in 1930 they were transferred to the state of Oregon as part of the state school fund to generate money for the state school fund.
It was a children's trust.
Exactly, for the Children's Trust lands. That was the sole purpose of that land transfer to the state of Oregon, and it's in the Oregon Constitution, to generate money for the state school fund for no other purpose. So at that time, every acre of that forest, colored light green, was for the purpose of generating income for the school fund. Now then, in order to create that forest, to balance the acreage within that land exchange between the federal government and the state, it required more than the light green that was U.S. Forest Service timberland. In order to balance that exchange to make an even value, the government added on the lands that are shaded and they're crosshatched in orange on the east side. That is 7,000 acres of land that had been owned by the ONC BLM organization. the old railroad grant lands. So those were added on to the Forest Service lands in order to balance the trade, and so the finally was, if you total the light green and the crosshatch orange, that became 70,000 acres that made up what this Elliott Forest became. So there's two different backgrounds there.
Is the BLM land, is that also common school fund land?
It is.
Okay.
Well, today it is. As of 1930, it became common school land.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so that all the income that now in order to allow that to happen, there were many different legal actions that had to happen for that trade to occur. Today, politically, that would never happen, but in 1930, it was still possible to do it. In order to do it, there had to be agreement from Coos County, the Coos County Board of Commissioners, and the Douglas County Board of Commissioners to give up their interest in those orange crosshatched lands, because until 1930 they would have had the right to about half of the revenue from the timber sold there going. The red represents lands that we acquired in the 1950s and 60s and 70s from private owners through land exchanges, trading state lands in Curry County, Douglas County, and Coos, trading those to private owners, trading those scattered state lands for these private lands within the Elliott Forest area. So those are lands that were acquired through timberland exchanges with private owners. The blue represents lands that were owned by the public, owned by BLM, and they were public domain lands. They were not ONC, they're public domain lands, and they were granted to the state of Oregon through a debt that the federal government owed to Oregon. So they were lands that were given to us, to the state, and became state school fund lands.
Now here's a cover to a surveyor.
That is a survey book, original survey book from 1930s. During the 1930s, there was a federal program called the CCCs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, established by President Roosevelt, to do work on mostly on private lands, but on other ownerships too, doing work. They built roads, they built telephone lines, they built parks. These were 18, 19-year-old young men, mostly from the eastern states. They came out to the west to work, earn a little bit of money for their families, and they had camps everywhere. That's one of the original field books with their survey notes, because one of their first jobs was to survey the boundary of the Elliott State Forest.
So that survey boundary was done by the 3 Cs.
On the west side, right. The western side of the forest, and a little bit of the south boundary, were surveyed by these CCC survey crews. You can see that at the very top of the book, it says 1933.
Yeah.
That was one of the original survey books. Their commitment was to never miss a day of work. So that, I think most viewers of this will recognize the weather on the coast is sometimes very tough. Rain virtually every day during the winter anyway, and a lot of summer. Mud, rain, snow sometimes. They're committed to never lose a day of work, and they never lost a day of work out there. Amazingly, never injured or killed a man who was there. And these are mostly inexperienced young men who are out there, learning how to work. Never wore hard hats. Use explosives every day, and somehow, miraculously, no one was ever killed. It's a great story. One of my first jobs in the forest was to locate survey markers to do early mapping. That was a place where I worked. I took my axe and cut out an old government survey boundary tree. That was a tree surveyed in the 1880s on the boundary between the Weyerhaeuser Tree Farm and the Elliott Forest, around the boundary, where the surveyor, back in, as I say, in about probably 1885, somewhere there, had cut open the face of that tree, and with a scribe had marked letters and numbers there showing where that was on the government survey line. That was a government survey tree north of Allegheny.
But it wasn't Dave's uncle that surveyed that.
No, it was done.
You could find those because if you knew approximately where they were, you could see the scar on the bark where the axe had
Right.
cut it.
Oh, he healed over.
Yeah.
So I cut that one out just to verify that's what it was.
That was one that you cut out yourself?
I
then?
did.
Oh, okay.
During the work done to create the state forest in the 1920s, there was just an incredible amount of work done to locate the state school lands that lay inside all the national forests in Oregon. Everywhere from Hell's Canyon over on, I guess, Idaho, clear to the Pacific Ocean. There were hundreds of areas of state school lands inside national forests. And during a matter of a couple of years, both the U.S. Forest Service and the state of Oregon had to locate, had to find those timberlands and to approximate what lay on those lands, to do more or less of an aerial survey, aerial inventory. I can't even imagine what was involved in doing that, because they didn't set foot on much of that land anywhere. They had to fly over it, and determine what was on it for timber species and volumes of and estimated values. And it's just, as I say, Crater Lake, Mount Hood, Hell's Canyon, everything in between. And they flew over it in airplanes like this. Is a de Havilland airplane in about 1925. So here is this Forest Service representative and from State Land Board flying over those areas and trying to estimate what they're flying over. I just can't, I can't even fully understand what they went through in doing that.
Where was this plane at? And did it fly the Elliott, this one specifically, or?
I don't know that.
Uh,
I think I got that picture from somewhere. I use it in my book just to illustrate what those men did.
So this is just a representative picture.
I don't think it probably wasn't that plane. There's one just like it.
So they had a small fleet of planes that they were doing the inventory with.
It may have only been one plane. I don't know that.
So that could have been the plane that did them all.
It could have been. It could have been. Well, the land we're talking about, the Elliott State Forest, consists of almost entirely steep ground. Thin soiled, very steep ground, very rocky terrain, but very fertile soil. All the good minerals are there, so it grows very good timber on very steep, difficult ground. That picture was taken in 1937, by a U.S. Forest Service photographer who was flying. We'll never know why he was doing it. The U.S. Forest Service hired him to fly over the area between Reed's Fort and Grants Pass. And fly in just a kind of a lackadaisical, apparently, pattern, fly in circles over all that area and take pictures for the Forest Service. And when we began managing the state forest, we acquired many of the pictures. And that's one of those pictures taken on the west, described in my book. And it said it was, at the time, they said it was the largest unbroken area of virgin timber on the west side over here. That's fog.
Is that along the river there?
I don't think so.
Probably sand dunes.
Would it be sand dunes?
No, I don't think so either. It's
Are
fog.
are we looking north?
I think we're looking, I'd say we're looking northeast.
So it's just a bank of
It's fog.
Okay.
And again, that's the same area. That's more of a close-up. That in Johnson's Creek, which is a tributary to South 10 Mile Lake. This is before any logging, of course, before any logging ever happened. Later part of that was balloon logged by a state of Oregon contractor.
Bohemia.
Bohemia?
Yes, it was.
Uh-huh.
That picture was taken in the 1930s when the CCC crew, that's one of those government crews, federal government crews, was doing work on the state forest, building the main road from Reed's Fort to Loon Lake. This is the most difficult job the CCC's ever attempted in Oregon. Most of it through heavy rock. It was the most difficult job they ever attempted in the state of Oregon. There, as you can see, nobody wore a hard hat in those days. They're using an air compressor to drill rock between Reed's Fort and Dean's Mountain.
Got to run jackhammers off the compressor.
Yep.
So how old's that kid operating it?
He could be 19 years old, 20 years old. That's the same area road. That's every year every day they went to work. From the camp on Schofield Creek, right near Reed's Fort, went to work every day, come rain or shine, in the trucks like this. That's one of the men on one of the CCC crews. When I wrote my book, I managed to find 7 of those men who had worked in the CCCs in the 30s. I was to find 7 of those men, and I found where they lived over in the Willamette Valley and locally here, and interviewed them, took pictures, and one of those men was ORWWmedia Hoffman. And as a picture he had, he let me use for my book.
Is that ORWWmedia right there, or is that the photographer?
It's a big picture he owned, and I don't know who that person is. One of the CC crew members. Now, to be fair, they were almost all young men, but they did have a few, they called them experienced workers, and they paid them a little more. So they paid the workers out there the young men, $30 a month, and they had to send $25 of those home to their families. So they got to had about $5 every month for spending money. And of course, there's nothing for them to buy. They're living in camps with no stores anywhere. So they had $5 to spend on virtually nothing. And they're, of course, they're fed, clothed, housed by the government CCC camp managers. Again, that is a picture of the land within the original Elliott Forest boundary. You see the straight lines, because that the outside boundaries there are the old National Forest boundaries. The boundaries later, as you can remember from other pictures, the boundaries later became wider for the south, east, and west because we acquired more land from private owners through land exchanges and more land from the federal government through paying their old debts for the state school fund. So that's the original National Forest boundaries, and the areas that are shown darker, those are all lands that were privately owned during those early days, privately owned or owned by the counties.
Now the northern boundary is the Umpqua River.
Yes, it is.
Is it the highway now, or does some of the state forest go all the way to the river?
They do. Some go across the river.
Aha.
Yes, they do.
There's a lot of private land in there though too.
All land that is shaded, for that matter, were not Elliott lands. They were owned by the counties or private owners.
But there is Umpqua frontage on part of the Elliott.
Yes, very little, but there is some. When the Elliott Forest became managed in 1955, they had to make decisions where they have an office. Well, the decision was to use a little bit of the CCC-built headquarters of the Coast Forest Protective Association. The CCC had built a main office for the Coos Fire Patrol on Bunker Hill, south of Coos Bay. And there's a picture of that office, the headquarters of the Coos Fire Patrol office in 1955. I was already working there for the State Department of Forestry when the Elliott was first became managed, and I went to work for that forest a year later. Well, a year after it was created.
So you operated out of this office?
Yes, I went to work in 1952, working for the State Department of Forestry. So I was already there in that building when the Elliott became managed, and they established a little room there for original Elliott Forest Management.
And what did the 3 Cs use that building for?
They built the building, but they didn't ever use it.
Oh.
They built the building for the Coos Fire Patrol.
Oh, I see. So from Coos Fire Patrol from the beginning then?
Right.
Oh, okay.
So they built that building in 1936.
When you were working there, you were working for the Forest Patrol for a while because you was a checker for the fire.
I was a trainee really there.
Oh, you were a trainer.
I was trainee. I worked for the State Forestry Department, but I was really working as a trainee with the Coos Fire Patrol.
Yeah, I first met you when I was 12 years old, and you came to our logging site and stopped my father from logging because he wasn't up on all the fire extinguishers. That's how I met Jerry.
That's early days. Well, that the picture I took on the southeast part of the state forest, of the Elliott Forest, is a typical picture of the southeast part of the forest as it was in the 1950s. That was a little older timber. That timber dates to about 1840. And that is where it abuts the Weyerhaeuser tree farm. All the timber, that picture, that's all Elliott timber. It's about 110 years old at that point, about 110 years old. Maybe a little older than that. And that was one of our early thinning operations.
Oh, so
So
that's
we-
been commercially thinned.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
we had removed about 10,000 board feet per acre for that stand.
Is that a big saddle?
Pardon?
Is that the big saddle maybe?
No, that's on probably Howell Creek or Cedar Creek.
Basically, yeah.
Howell Creek or Cedar Creek.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
That's down below Elks Peak.
Uh-huh.
And that's the same, that's on Knife Ridge. More timber that's more typical 1890 birth date timber.
So about 70 years old when you took a picture of it.
By then it's probably 80 years. I took that picture about maybe 1980. I took that picture,
Uh-huh.
something like that. That timber has been thinned. That's our Knife Ridge Road, one of our state logging roads.
Who's that?
But, yeah, who is that guy? Well, that's me probably, I don't know, maybe 1985, 86, somewhere there.
What was the purpose of this photo?
I have no memory of why it was.
Uh-huh. Just a good photo.
Just me. And I was serving as the manager of that forest, the field manager, and I took a lot of pride in doing that.
Uh-huh.
Being that we did a lot of work to manage that forest better, bigger and better through a lot of hard work. And a lot of good contractors, including Dave Gould's dad, who helped build a lot of our roads out there. There's probably $5 million worth of roads out there. Most of them were all dirt roads originally. We couldn't afford rock for them, and so they were all dirt roads, built on very tough ground. But those roads are the basis for being able to manage that timberland.
Yep.
Without roads, all you have is land.
Uh-huh.
It's part of the value.
Right. Just another picture of how that timber looked. A typical, probably 80-year-old Douglas fir on Elliott timberlands. The kind of timber that was there on most of the forest, we started managing it. Now, we began managing, we had some basic rules that we had all followed. One of those was, it was all young timber, about 70 years old, so it was not mature enough yet to harvest.
Oh.
We were to harvest only old timber originally. Timber that was at least 90 years old or 100 years old. We tried to harvest only old growth. That was the number one priority, harvest only old growth. And we had about 8,000 acres of old growth timber along the edges of the forest.
Some of the area we saw on the map that was green.
It was green.
Uh-huh.
So we harvested only old growth for the first few years. And the original allowable harvest was 32 million board feet on the Elliott ownership. 32 million board feet of state school lands.
Uh-huh.
And I took the picture there, so I'm not in it. But
You're the photographer here.
I was a photographer.
Yep.
That was our original working crew on the forest,
Uh-huh.
doing inventory work. The man on the left-hand side was Bob Montier. He was our original forest manager. The other men were, and myself, were the original crew working on the forest.
Wow.
And that picture's taken back on the east end of the 1000 Road. Of course, at that point, the road wasn't a through road yet. It was still building original roads. But that's a place called Powderhouse Saddle.
Wow.
On the east end of Elk Ridge. That was our original 1955 Jeep. Bob Montier sort of only a Biltmore stick, a cruising stick.
Would you call that Jeep a crummy or just call it the Jeep?
I just called it just a Jeep.
Uh-huh.
And that was timber back on Howell Creek, the Howell Creek, Cedar Creek area of older timber. Very high quality timber, very high quality.
This says 110 years old, but it was taken, this picture, what did that date back to the 1840 fire?
I think so.
Okay.
I think at that time we didn't know the ages. Our borings, age borings showed to be about 110 years old.
Uh-huh.
And
those were done in the 50s.
Yes.
So 1840 would be a good guess on this then.
I think so.
Uh-huh.
You can see hemlock in that stand right there.
Yeah.
Young hemlock growing in there. So anytime we saw timber in Elk Creek or land nearby that contained hemlock, older hemlock, we knew about what year it was.
Uh-huh. So the hemlock would indicate the 1840 burn,
It did.
but the 1868 or 1870 burn didn't have any hemlock in it.
No hemlock or cedar.
Oh, so you could just look at the understory and
Pretty much.
age the timber.
Pretty much.
Uh-huh.
Again, that's at the time. I say 120 because it's a little older now.
Yeah.
In 1960, I said there was only an 1840 fire.
Yeah.
Again, that's the area of the land that we had thinned. We thinned about 15,000 acres out there. I say thinned. We never use the word thinning because people imply, from thinning they imply future growth. And our goal was to remove the smaller diameter timber, smaller diameter and defective timber from that stand to retain the rest of it, in this picture, the residual here, to retain it for future harvest. And we realized we had a large oversupply, just as a word to use there, of timber that was 70, 80, 90 years old. So we felt we had to retain the better timber in part of it to be harvested later on. So we call them partial cuts.
Uh-huh.
Instead of thinning, we call them partial cuts.
Uh-huh.
And as a result, that's a partial cut where we remove 10,000 board feet per acre in mostly cable operations, because it's all seat ground. So what's left there is a very high quality stand of 120-year-old timber.
You're setting it up for the marble Murrelet.
Yep. And that is,
Just another stand of the same age group.
that's right,
Uh-huh.
with some young hemlock in it.
So the partial cut hasn't happened yet.
None of that.
Uh-huh.
That is timber in the Big Saddle area. That's in the south end of the state forest that the Elk Ridge Road passes through. picture I took of probably 90-year-old fir. That has not been thinned,
Uh-huh.
not been partial cut. That is a picture taken, or it's a map of the Elliott Forest later on. You can see there the boundaries have expanded now, and the map is intended to show where the old timber was on the forest, timber that was not involved in the big fires.
So this would be the areas that was green in that first map.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Our original logging was in the areas that are shown there as dark. That was where our original logging was in the mid to late 50s.
Did they call that old growth at the time, or was that,
We call it old growth.
okay?
Yep.
It's closer to the road system also,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't have to build the road to it.
Uh-huh.
Now that timber is also in the big saddle area, and South Elk Ridge. That's in the Howell Creek, Cedar Creek areas along South Elk Ridge. Some of the timber we used to finance the road building.
Uh-huh.
See, we had the timber sale purchasers build the roads, and we allowed for the cost of the road building in the contract. So the timber paid for the roads. The operators built the roads for a reduced cost of the timber. When they made bids on the timber sales, the bids included the cost of the roads.
Did David's dad build any of these roads?
He
Not so
He
many.
probably did some work
Uh-huh.
on them, but they mainly were built by the timber sale purchasers.
Uh-huh.
We didn't really get started on that till about 1972.
Uh-huh.
Then we had the quarry. We were providing rock for the rocking on the sails.
Uh-huh.
So that picture there represents there were shown dark on the previous slide as being dark. That's old growth.
Even though it was only 180, they were calling it old growth.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
because we figured anything from age 100, 180 on was, and we didn't care how old it was.
Uh-huh.
It didn't matter to us. Now, not everyone seeing this film is going to agree, is going to understand what the term old growth is.
Yep.
It has no relationship to size.
Uh-huh.
To size. Old growth is a logger's term. A logger's term meaning large timber.
Uh-huh.
Large timber.
Older.
Large, normally high quality.
Yep.
Large timber.
Uh-huh.
And it usually refers to timber that's more than 150 years old.
Yeah.
But the exact age doesn't really matter. The size doesn't matter. To loggers, to foresters, it's large, older timber.
Uh-huh.
Large, high quality, older timber.
Yep.
Again, this is a picture.
It's just a picture off the cover of your book here.
It is, yes, it
Yep.
is. Taken in 1958. 200-acre clear-cut logging operation, typical those days. In a standard old growth. It involved building 8 miles of road. The timber buyer had to build 8 miles of roads to get in there and to do harvesting. 8 miles of dirt road, and it remained dirt road.
No, we saw that when we did the oral history, and it was all second growth, and you said it had been aerial seeded, and now it's been clear cut again.
That's right. That stand grew up The next year, following this, next year grew up, harvested again, and I don't know, maybe year, I don't know, 2010, whatever, somewhere in there.
Uh-huh.
That photograph's on the right side is the head of Silver Creek, and it's the boundary of the Weyerhaeuser and the state forest. And the yard or the pole sitting on very close to the line, and it's on the 1,000.
Right, that
It's about 7
version
miles.
instead of the picture is the ownership boundary between Weyerhaeuser and state. In 1962, a disastrous windstorm happened along the Oregon coast. It began down in about Crescent City, California, and went clear up to Vancouver Island. It was called a tropical cyclone. They got off duty, off course. It started in Guam. And almost never happened, but it got off course and blew clear from Guam to the Oregon, to the coast here. It blew, no one knows how it blew because all the anemometers blew down. But it probably blew somewhere around 150 miles an hour.
Wow.
It blew down, well, hundreds of millions of board feet of timber on all ownerships. Weyerhaeuser, State of Oregon, U.S. Forest Service, all ownerships. And amazingly killed only a few people. And that picture included in there is how, it's not a very clear picture, but that's how the timberland in the area here looked after the storm. It blew down, someplace blew down all the timber, someplace blew down part of the timber, and we had to make the decisions, everyone had to make decisions where to harvest and where to not harvest. It was a judgment call. The storm happened in October, so we weren't sure how long that sap was going to last to prevent rot and insect damage. It blew down about 100 million board feet of timber on the state forest, just on the Elliott forest. 100 million board feet. That was one of the hardest things to deal with, was that storm occurred mainly impacting the west side of the state forest, the west side of the Elliott, where we had virtually no roads.
Uh-huh.
There were no roads because that was all younger timber, 70, 80-year-old timber. So we hadn't built any roads there because the timber was too young to be harvestable according to our plans.
Uh-huh.
But we had to harvest anyway. That meant building a lot of roads very quickly in very difficult ground. So we had to build, probably 110 miles of roads very quickly. And Dave's dad knew how to build roads like that.
Uh-huh.
So the buyers of timber knew what to do. They had men on those tractors that knew how to build side hill roads,
Yeah.
side hill construction, cut and fill, no engineering, no side cast disposal.
They were sidecasting then.
Cut and blast.
Wow.
Lots
And-
of blasting.
Yes. It was a terrible, terrible time. And amazingly, no one got killed.
Wow.
Amazing amount of hard, smart work
Uh-huh.
by all those contractors in road building and logging.
Uh-huh. Well, thank-
Yeah, now, everyone did a lot of learning in those days. One thing that was never done in the early days by anybody was to allow riparian buffers along streams. It was believed not necessary. Fish and Wildlife did not require it, did not recommend it. The belief was there would be enough hardwood trees and brush along the edge to more or less shade the streams. But in 1962, we had a new manager come to work for us, Everett Hunt. And he decided that it would be a good idea to leave some riparian trees also. So he modified one of our early sales on the upper West Fork Millicoma to exclude the trees along the river. They're almost all hardwoods. But instead of just cutting them just to places to plant trees along the stream, he modified the boundary to leave a buffer along that river, and that buffer's still there to this very day. That was our first created buffer after the sale was already.
Back in those days, Jerry, they didn't, they just felled the hardwood and left it. They didn't.
Exactly right.
They become merchantable
Look,
later.
these were almost all maples.
Yeah.
They weren't worth anything anyway.
In Holder, they weren't taking it out.
So that's how that happened. Our first
Very good idea.
created buffer.
How come they called Everett? Why'd they call him Mike? Was that a joke, or didn't they call Hunt? Didn't they call him the name Mike?
Yeah,
What?
just a nickname. His name was Everett Hunt.
Yeah.
Everett Hunt. Fish and Wildlife said they would like to have a little buffer left along a fork of Big Creek. We were going to sell that timber in there, the mixture of fir and alder. And so I was the manager at that time. No, I wasn't quite yet. I didn't become manager up until 1970. So that Everett Hunt was still there. But I was doing the sale planning. And so I arranged to leave the timber in the bottom of Big Creek there as a buffer on both sides of the creek. It's almost all alder, but there's maybe 15 or 20 fir trees there also. And so that's how that buffer occurred. I was doing it to please the Fish and Wildlife people. And later we had a tour of people from the State Land Board, and we were showing them our logging operations. I was telling them how that buffer happened to be there, and they were very bothered by it. They said, well, you're just leaving those trees there? I said, yes, we are, to please the Fish and Wildlife biologists. And they said, well, who's going to pay us for them? Those trees belong to the state school fund. Those trees belong to the state school fund, and they're worth some money. So who's going to pay us for those? So, well, no one's going to. They're just left there to benefit the fish population in the creek there. Well, they were unhappy. State Land Board was unhappy that was happening. That's the story of that buffer.
Was it the State Land Board or Department of State Lands?
State Land Board.
They sure changed their attitude.
Who's going to pay us for those?
Changed their attitude in the
Those
last
state
century.
school fund.
Yeah.
School fund trees.
Yeah. And they wanted them cut, or they wanted them paid for.
They want either harvested and paid for that way, or paid for by somebody, because they were school fund trees.
Do you think that's been any benefit to the fish or wildlife because they were left behind?
Well, Fish and Wildlife said it was. Said fish runs
Yep.
up Big Creek.
Yep.
They asked us to, if we would please leave those.
Yep.
So I arranged so we did. I modified the cell boundary to leave those.
Are they still there today?
Yep, they're
They didn't blow down or burn up?
nope, because they're in a protected place, the creek bottom.
Uh-huh.
Mostly alder.
This might be the last one in this sequence here. That's your poem. You want to read it?
Well, it's words of a song, of course.
Oh, is it a song you wrote or
No.
somebody else's song?
From words from my country 'tis of thee.
Oh.
My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. For thee I sing, I love thy rocks and rills, thy woods and templed hills. My heart with rapture thrills. Let freedom ring. Is that how it goes?
I think so. Yeah, it matched the words there. I have no idea.
I just use those lyrics from the song, My Country 'Tis of Thee.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Not my words, those are words from the national song.
Uh-huh. Let's see.
Should have been a singer, Jerry.
That's a good way to end that.
The last segment in this video will be Bob, Jerry, and David talking about the current conditions on the Elliott and discussing their hopes for the future.
And I want to think that we have created today
Uh-oh.
a very, very valuable forest, worth probably $1 billion,
Uh-huh.
that is there for the people of Oregon. Legally, it is still committed to the state school fund, as a trust forest for the Oregon school children,
Yep.
K through 8. The income has always been distributed. The income is invested. Every dollar we ever earn in that forest for the state school fund is still there.
Uh-huh.
It's still invested.
Uh-huh.
Not spent. Can't be spent. It's called the irreducible state school fund.
Uh-huh.
Can't spend it. So the income is invested, and income is distributed to the schools in Oregon, all the counties
Uh-huh.
of Oregon. Still legally required every year. The whole thing is so fantastic.
Yeah.
That just I don't like fantasy.
Oh.
I like realism. I don't like fantasy.
Yep.
So I don't watch fantasy on television.
Yep.
I don't read fantasy books.
Yep.
I don't like fantasy.
Yep.
I deal with reality.
Yep.
I'm pretty hard nosed when it comes to reality. I
Yep.
want what I can believe in.
Yep.
So that's why I have a very down view of the whole present picture. I don't see anything positive about the present picture.
Uh-huh. Nothing positive.
Virtually nothing.
Yep.
Because all the so-called stakeholders
Yep.
are in violent disagreement.
Oh.
Kind of like our nation's politics. Our
Yep.
nation's politics.
Yep.
See, she's an age, but she's lived with nothing else than how the politics are today.
Yep.
I've lived through probably 8 or 10 presidents, so I've experienced a lot,
Yep.
and so I'm a realist of how the future can change.
Yep.
I wouldn't bet it $10 on the future being anything,
Uh-huh.
because people are people,
Yep.
and none of us sitting here can change anything.
Yep.
I don't like to say it that way. Dave has done and is doing, to me, amazing things
Yep.
with his efforts,
Yep.
his content. He's expended hundreds of hours
Yep. thousands of hours.
both on the ground out there,
Yeah.
and in politics. He's everything he can do.
Yeah.
His wife would agree with that.
Yeah.
But the wheels of reality move grindingly slow, but inexorably along.
Yeah.
And if you want to see things change, they're very slow.
Yeah.
Good or bad, either one.
Yeah.
But there's this inertia of bad out there as far as this force is concerned.
Yeah.
That force is going to be there. I mean, we all can agree, being realists.
Yeah.
That force is going to be there in some condition. It'll be a few roads will kept open. Whoever is managing it, there'll be a few roads kept open. Not many.
No.
Most roads that we know out there will become trails, with all the culverts out of them.
Yep.
Trails. I don't mean it's all going to go to hell. I don't mean to say that.
Yeah.
It's going to become very, very different. It'll still be a forest,
Yeah.
but not recognizable as it has been.
No.
I was in a scenario where it's going to be a forest producing revenue and jobs.
No.
Any scenario.
You don't see any potential.
None.
Even with the law, with David's efforts, my efforts, the Dave Sullivan's efforts, the Bill Lansing's efforts, everybody.
Oh, everyone trying his best.
Yep. And you don't think we got a chance?
I don't think we got a chance either,
Then why do you keep going?
because I believe in what I believe in.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you're following your belief, but you don't think we've got
I was told that this forest belonged to me when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
I was a beneficiary of the trust, and everybody's forgetting about the beneficiary of the trust.
And to me, it's hard to find optimism in there, Bob.
Aha.
You know, I wish there were.
China already owns a lot of this country.
Well, I try to be an optimist, and I look to you guys for leadership on it. So, of course, I'm only in my 70s. Well, David, you're still in your 70s, just barely. Let's see. So.
See, I work so hard. All my work, I work so hard to make the forest better.
Yeah.
We get more productive, more efficient. I couldn't beautify it very much.
Yeah.
I at least maintain it to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees, yes, it's still beautiful. Still have to go out there.
Yeah.
But as far as the future
Yeah.
being good for revenue or jobs, either one,
Yeah.
I have a hard time seeing it. I'm a born optimist,
Yeah.
but I have a hard time maintaining my optimism
Your realist has taken over.
to a large degree.
Uh-huh.
To a large degree. Now I got a bunch of grandkids and great grandkids.
Yeah.
I want them to live in a good world
Yeah.
and to have hope.
Yeah.
I want for her to have hope.
Yeah.
She's got 60 or 70 more good years ahead of her.
Yeah.
I want her to feel good about those.
Yeah.
I want her to someday have kids and to encourage them to have a future.
Yeah.
So whether it's this right here or like this, I want so much for it to be good.
Yeah.
But I look around, it's very hard to see good signs out there. Good signs. Because the power is all kind of going this way.
I'm seeing a backlash, but I'm still trying to be an optimist.
Keep on. We should all try.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be observant
Yeah.
of what's out there. I sincerely wish that we could project
Uh-huh.
for these students. Most of these students are young.
Yep.
And someone's 40 years old they're pretty much where they are.
Yep.
But for young students, and there's a bunch of grandkids and great grandkids.
Yep.
I wish we could inject into them
Yeah.
a sense of good.
Yeah,
A sense of good.
yeah,
This forest will always be in my mind,
yeah,
a special place.
yeah,
It's not just a forest.
yeah,
I think every forest has its good aspects to it.
yeah,
This forest is a special forest with a special original purpose,
yeah,
which is twisted beyond belief.
yeah,
But if I was 18 years old, 20 years old, 25 years old, I would want to believe in a good future. So I hope we can somehow instill a level that's believable
Yeah.
for good for that forest.
yeah,
Going around being a bummer is not the way I want to live.
yeah,
I try not to.
Yeah.
My daughter would probably say I do it too much, and probably you guys would too. I want to believe that there is a lot of good still out there. It's hard for me right now to identify it. It appears to me it will never be a productive forest again, producing jobs and revenue.
not, you know.
I hate to say that. And even, of course, in the ideal world, I suppose, as ideal as it could be, somehow money would appear,
Yeah. Yeah,
and $1 billion would go to the school fund,
yeah,
and they would invest it and use that would be the best. That's the best I can hope for.
so you're hoping it gets, sold for fair market value, then the kids have been taken care of, but the forest is not the children's forest anymore.
Well, no, the force wouldn't be, but the money would be.
Yep,
The money would. That's been the purpose was to create, not create, was to enhance the common school fund.
yeah,
Get the common school fund built to help schools and pay teachers.
right,
Two of my kids are lifetime teachers.
yeah,
But unless that $1 billion appears out of
Yep.
thin air,
yeah,
I haven't seen that happening. But that would be the best I can imagine.
uh-huh.
Because just standing there doesn't help the school fund at all. Not one tick.
Yeah. But David, what's your most optimistic view? I'll tell you mine. I think mine's more optimistic and more realistic than yours. But that's
Okay,
what
all
I
right,
wonder.
good. All right,
Well, I was
Good.
going to wait for David first here.
paint the picture
Well,
right.
I think the children should, if they're gonna decouple, they have to give them the value.
So if they get $1 billion, like Jerry's
If they get
saying,
$1 billion, that would be close enough to the value,
yeah,
but if they get anything less than that, they're not, and,
It's theft.
I spend money out there, helping the roads, make them better, to try to get people to come out and look at their forest and enjoy it.
Bob, tell us your vision of a positive.
well, first thing I think, this might not sound positive, but I think it'll go back into production and produce a lot of jobs again. But the people doing it might be Chinese. That's realistic.
Gotta be more
They're not going to let us just sit there and piddle away all our resources for all these years and
Well, the way-
let it go to hell. Somebody's going to come in and say, "What the hell are they doing?" But we've been making good progress with Tasha's class, with these videos, with the videos that Kenzie's been working on, and what we're doing, and putting it out there pretty clearly. But most people aren't absorbing it. Is we're making modules for kids all over the state, for all the teachers, so that the Elliott is the children's forest. And at the very least, what they can learn is economics, they can learn history, they can learn biology, they can learn politics, they can learn forestry, they can learn geology, they can learn geography, but the Elliott is a children's forest, and that is their outdoor classroom for every kid in Oregon.
It's all behind the scenes.
But there's where my optimism is. I think that we can continue educating people. It's the children's forest. We got to make that known. It hasn't been known, and through the wonder of internet and video and letters to the board of trustees, I think,
Who
we stop
is-
them from decoupling. We might not be able to get 400 jobs back, but I think we'll get the Elliott, it would keep moving. We're gonna get people understanding more about forestry, more about politics, more about what's going on, and a greater love for the Elliott itself. If we can make that the basis for education for kids all over the state, so they all realize that the next generation is gonna come up and not be as ignorant as the last 2 or 3 generations. Or actually, most of them, I think they used to be, everybody grew up on a farm and had a logging family, and those days were gone.
Afraid so?
They don't have,
I'm
they
afraid-
don't have the knowledge or the training or the environment. And so I think that's where the Elliott, a lot of optimism
The public-
can be, as a educational resource
The
for,
public
Yeah.
is being taught
yeah,
from children on up
yeah.
that a forest is good to look at. It's good to put mushrooms in.
It's great for
It's
spotted owls.
good to walk around in.
Yeah,
Not all advertisements are that way. What ads do you see on TV from Forest Service? Well, come out and enjoy the sunshine. Pick a flower, pick a few flowers.
yeah,
Come walk, enjoy the sunshine. See different color leaves, different color leaves.
yeah.
That's what you see from the U.S. Forest Service.
On the radio, they got ads that you can go out in the forest and find fireflies.
There
It's
you
crazy.
go.
It's like,
It's showing what a pitiful,
Yeah.
almost criminal
yeah,
propaganda that is
yep,
by the government
exactly.
and schools.
Yep. That's why they're ignorant. They're easily manipulated. They're not stupid. They're not educated. They don't have the experience. And so that's, I think, where my optimism is like, well, wait a minute. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. They think they have knowledge when they get bad information, like, go out in the forest and what silly stuff that they say that you can do out in the forest you can do in your garden. I'm thinking with what we're doing and the result we're getting and the response we're getting, it's still possible to take the Elliott and use it as a way to better educate coming generations, younger people. So,
I hope so.
There's a lot of people who have respect for the children of the forest because the people go out there and pick up the garbage, and you go out there, you see very little garbage.
we weren't seeing that 3 or 4 years ago, though. We saw a lot of those camps, and I videoed or photographed them and put them online. They've cleaned up a lot of that. And a lot of it's been us out there with the oral histories and working with the classes and,
Yeah, but I know several people that do pick up the stuff.
yeah.
And,
Well, we saw the mud runners out there.
they're wanting to put rocks down there and try to stop that now, so.
But we all
Yeah,
keep on living for a reason.
yeah,
We keep on living for a reason. We all have, we don't ever say this, but we all have an internal mission statement.
an internal mission statement.
Right, we all have one.
Yeah,
That's how we get up in the morning and time of the day, we have an internal mission statement.
yeah,
So we care about.
yeah. I think that's what's driving each of us, and it doesn't necessarily limit it to the Elliott, but that's certainly part of it, and that's where my optimism is. I see it as a tool to really help a lot of people, and just helping in saying that they make better decisions because they're better educated. That's why we set up Oregon websites 20-some years ago. It's like to inform the next generation of students so they can make better decisions. But that's the whole idea is to make better decisions about managing our resources, whether they're cultural, historical, or natural forestry and that. And that's where I think what we're doing and trying to achieve with the Elliott really is worthwhile, and I think it's making a difference. We just can't quite see it because it's slow, but it bits and pieces, and I think the fact they haven't decoupled it is
That is the one shining light out there
Yep.
that's still visible.
And that concludes our first lab for spring term classes on the Elliott. We'll be leaving Cougar Pass here shortly. And next week we will be taking a field trip to Elkhorn Ranch with David Gould.